Open your Start menu right now and type the name of a personal file, a tax document, a photo, a folder you named after someone private in your life. Now ask yourself this question. Where did those keystrokes actually go? Because here is the uncomfortable truth. On a default Windows 11 setup, the answer is not they stayed on your computer. Some of them left your machine entirely. They traveled across the internet to a server owned by Microsoft before your local search results had even finished loading. You typed a private word about a private file sitting on your own hard drive on a computer you own, and a piece of that interaction may have already been transmitted somewhere else before you hit enter. This is not a hypothetical. This is the default, out-of-the-box behavior of one of the most used features in Windows 11, and almost nobody knows it's happening. Let's pull this apart, piece by piece, because what's hiding inside your taskbar search bar is bigger than most people realize. Let's start with the feature itself, because to understand the problem, you need to understand exactly what this thing is. It's called Windows Search, and it lives in that little search box on your taskbar, the one you use constantly without thinking about it. You press the Windows key, or you click the magnifying glass icon, and you start typing. Maybe you're looking for a file called Passport Scan. Maybe you're looking for an app. Maybe you're looking for a setting. This search box has become one of the most heavily used entry points into the entire operating system, because it's faster than clicking through folders, faster than navigating menus, faster than almost anything else Windows offers. And that convenience is exactly what makes what happens next so important to understand. When Windows Search was originally designed, going back to earlier versions of Windows, it was a purely local tool. It searched an index built from your files, your installed applications, and your system settings. That index lived entirely on your machine. Nothing left your computer. The search was fast because Windows had already cataloged everything in advance, sitting quietly in the background, building a map of your file system so that when you typed a query, it could return results instantly without having to scan your entire hard drive in real time. But somewhere along the way, and this shift really accelerated with Windows 10 and has continued into Windows 11, Microsoft began blending that local search experience with web search results, specifically powered by Bing. And this is where the story gets genuinely concerning. Because the blending wasn't presented to users as a major behavioral change requiring explicit, informed consent. It was simply turned on, quietly, as part of the default experience. The search box you've been using for years to find your own files on your own computer was now also, simultaneously, a portal sending your queries to Microsoft's servers, and the visual design of the search box gave you almost no indication that this distinction even existed. Here's how it actually works under the hood, and this matters because the mechanics reveal exactly how invasive this is. When you start typing into the Windows search box, the system begins processing your input character by character, not just as a completed query after you hit enter. As you type, Windows is simultaneously checking your local index for matches and, depending on your configuration, sending those same characters, or fragments of them, to Bing's web search infrastructure to generate suggestions, web results, and what Microsoft calls enhanced search results that blend local files, apps, settings, and internet content into a single unified results pane. Think about what that actually means in practice. It means your keystrokes, not just your finished search term, but potentially the letters as you type them, are being transmitted toward Microsoft's servers in something close to real time. If you start typing the name of a medical condition because you're searching for a PDF you saved about it, those characters may be heading toward Bing before you've even finished spelling the word. If you're searching for a file related to a legal matter, a family issue, a financial document, or anything else deeply personal, the search experience that feels like it's just looking through your own computer is, by default, also functioning as a live data feed to a third party. And that third party happens to be one of the largest technology corporations in the world. This is the part that deserves real scrutiny, because the implications go far beyond simple inconvenience. Local file search and personal information should, by any reasonable standard of digital privacy, remain exactly that, local. The entire premise of having files stored on your own hard drive, rather than in some cloud service you've explicitly chosen to use, is that those files stay under your control unless you decide otherwise. But when the very act of searching for those files, an action you take dozens of times a day without thinking twice, triggers a transmission of your search terms to an external server, the boundary between my private computer and Microsoft's data collection ecosystem becomes far blurrier than most users would ever assume, and far blurrier than most users would consent to if they fully understood what was happening. Let's talk about why this matters from a practical real-world threat perspective, not just a philosophical one. Consider professionals who handle sensitive information as a normal part of their work. A therapist searching for a client's case notes, an accountant searching for a client's financial records during tax season, a journalist searching for a document related to a source, a small business owner searching for an employee's personnel file. In each of these cases, the search terms themselves, The names, the topics, the specific identifying details typed into that search box carry real sensitivity. And in each of these cases, on a default Windows 11 configuration, those search terms may be partially transmitted to Microsoft servers as a routine, invisible side effect of simply trying to find a file on their own computer. This isn't about assuming malicious intent on Microsoft's part with how this specific data is used. It's about the fundamental principle of data minimization, the idea that information should only be collected when there's a genuine, disclosed, and consented to purpose for collecting it. Searching for a local file on your own hard drive does not require sending that search term to a corporate server hundreds or thousands of miles away. The local index is sufficient. The web search blending is an added feature, layered on top of a function that worked perfectly well without it, and it was added in a way that defaults to on, rather than asking users whether they actually want their local searches blended with internet queries in the first place. Now, let's get into the specific settings involved, because understanding exactly where this lives in the system is the first step toward doing something about it. Within Windows 11's search settings, there's an option related to search permissions and another related to safe search and web result integration. The specific toggle that controls whether your taskbar search includes web results alongside your local file and app results is something many users have never seen because it's not part of the initial setup wizard. It's not something Windows asks you about when you first turn on your new computer. It exists in the Settings app under Privacy and Security, then Search Permissions, and within that menu, options exist to limit search to your device only, or to allow it to continue blending in cloud and web content. The fact that this setting exists at all is, in a strange way, an admission from Microsoft that the behavior is significant enough to warrant a control. But the fact that the control is buried several menu layers deep, disabled from view during initial setup, and defaulted to the more data-sharing configuration rather than the more private one, tells you everything about how Microsoft expects the vast majority of users to interact with this feature, which is to say, without ever realizing there was a choice to make in the first place. Let's widen the lens a bit and talk about something connected but distinct. How Windows 11 search doesn't just touch your file names, but increasingly reaches into content as well. The indexing system that powers Windows Search has, over successive updates, expanded its scope to include not just file and folder names, but in many configurations, the actual content within certain file types, including text documents, PDFs, and emails, handled through Microsoft's own applications. This means the index Windows builds isn't simply a list of "this file exists, here's its name." Well, in many cases, it's a deeper catalog that includes textual content from inside your files, allowing you to search for a phrase that appears inside a document, not just a file name that matches what you typed. On its own, deeper content indexing is a genuinely useful feature for finding things quickly. Nobody is arguing it shouldn't exist as a capability. The concern is about where that indexed content goes, how it interacts with cloud-connected features, and how clearly that relationship is disclosed to the average user. When your local search experience is blended with cloud search infrastructure, and your local index includes the actual content of your documents rather than just their names, the theoretical surface area for what could be transmitted, intentionally or as a byproduct of system behavior, expands considerably. Microsoft has stated that local file content search remains separate from cloud transmission in their official documentation. And to be fair and accurate, there is no confirmed evidence that the full text content of your private documents is being uploaded wholesale to Microsoft servers through this specific mechanism. That would be a different and far more severe claim than what's actually documented. What is documented repeatedly by independent researchers and confirmed through network traffic analysis is that search query strings, the actual words and partial words you type into that search box, do get transmitted as part of the web search blending feature in real time as you type. This distinction matters. And it's important to be precise here, rather than exaggerating the claim into something it isn't. The documented, verifiable concern is specifically about search queries, the text you type into the search box, being sent toward Bing servers as part of the default web search blended experience. It is not a documented claim that Windows is uploading the full contents of your private files to Microsoft without your knowledge. Being accurate about the actual scope of the issue is important, because the issue is serious enough on its own terms without needing to inflate it into something broader and less substantiated. So let's stay precise and focus on what's verifiably true. Your search queries, the literal characters you type when looking for something on your own computer, are by default partially or fully transmitted to Microsoft's Bing infrastructure as part of the integrated search experience. This has been independently observed through network monitoring tools by privacy researchers and technically proficient users who've documented outbound traffic to Bing-associated domains occurring specifically when users interact with the taskbar search box. even when searching for purely local content like file names or installed application names that have no logical reason to require an internet connection to resolve. Think about that specific detail for a moment, because it's one of the more telling pieces of evidence in this entire story. If you search for an application that's already installed on your computer, let's say you type the name of a program you use every day, one that's sitting right there in your Start menu, there is no functional reason that search needs to touch the internet at all. The application exists locally, its name is already indexed locally. Finding it should be an entirely offline operation, completed in milliseconds using data that already lives on your machine. And yet, network traffic analysis has shown outbound connections occurring during exactly this kind of search, suggesting that the blending isn't selectively triggered only when a web result might genuinely add value. It's happening as a more blanket, default behavior built into how the search experience operates. Now, let's talk about why this happened, because understanding Microsoft's likely motivation here helps make sense of the broader pattern. Bing, as a search engine, has historically struggled to gain meaningful market share against Google. Integrating Bing search results directly into the Windows operating system, making it unavoidable, embedding it into one of the most frequently used interface elements in the entire system, is a strategic way to generate search volume and advertising impressions. For Bing, that it would never organically achieve if users had to deliberately choose to visit Bing's website. Every time a Windows user types into that taskbar search box and sees web results appear, that's an impression, a potential click, and a data point that benefits Microsoft's advertising and search business, regardless of whether the user actually wanted or asked for those web results in the first place. This reframes the entire feature in an important way. It's not simply a convenience feature that happens to have some side effects. It's a deliberately designed mechanism for driving engagement with Microsoft's search and advertising business, using the operating system's most fundamental and frequently used search function as the delivery vehicle. And because it's embedded at the operating system level rather than existing as a separate optional application you'd have to choose to install, it reaches every single Windows user by default, generating an enormous volume of search-related data and engagement that Microsoft would have to work much harder to capture through any other channel. Let's also address something specific to Windows 11 Pro users, because there's an important and slightly different angle here. Windows 11 Pro is marketed toward professionals, small businesses, and power users, people who, by the nature of their work, are statistically more likely to be searching for sensitive business documents, client files, financial records, and confidential materials on a regular basis. The irony is sharp. The version of Windows specifically marketed to people who handle more sensitive information professionally does not, by default, behave any differently than the consumer home version when it comes to this search and web blending behavior. A small business owner running Windows 11 Pro, searching their own machine for a client contract, is subject to the exact same default search behavior as someone running Windows 11 Home, searching for a recipe they saved last week. Group policy, available specifically on Pro and higher editions, does allow administrators to disable web search integration more thoroughly and enforce local-only search behavior across managed devices. This is a genuine capability that exists in Pro, but not in Home. But here's the critical detail. It's not enabled by default, even on Pro. It requires someone to actively know the setting exists, navigate to the local group policy editor, or configure it through more advanced administrative tools, and deliberately turn it on. For an individual professional or small business owner without a dedicated IT department, this level of technical configuration is simply not something most people will ever discover or implement, meaning the theoretical advantage Pro offers in this specific area goes largely unused by the people who might benefit from it most. Now, let's broaden out and talk about another layer to this story. How this search behavior connects to the larger pattern of Windows increasingly treating your local computer as an extension of an always connected cloud-integrated ecosystem rather than a standalone private device. This isn't isolated to search. We see similar patterns with OneDrive's default integration into File Explorer, where your documents, pictures, and desktop folders can be automatically redirected to cloud storage during setup, sometimes without users fully realizing their local folders have been transformed into synced cloud folders. We see it with Recall, the controversial feature introduced for Copilot plus PCs that takes continuous screenshots of your on-screen activity to build a searchable visual timeline, a feature so invasive in its original form that it prompted significant public backlash and led Microsoft to delay and substantially revise its rollout, making it opt-in rather than default, specifically because of the scale of privacy concerns raised by security researchers and journalists alike. The search to Bing blending we've been discussing is, in many ways, a quieter, less dramatic cousin of these more obviously alarming features. It doesn't take screenshots. It doesn't continuously record your screen. But it shares the same underlying philosophy. that your local activity, your local files, your local search behavior are all reasonable inputs into Microsoft's broader data and advertising ecosystem by default, unless you take deliberate, informed action to opt out. And because this particular feature is so deeply embedded into something as mundane and frequently used as the taskbar search box, it's arguably more consequential in aggregate than flashier, more publicized features, simply because of how often it's triggered across hundreds of millions of devices, multiple times a day, for years on end. Let's talk numbers for a moment, in the sense of scale rather than precise statistics, because this helps illustrate why a seemingly small behavior matters so much when multiplied across its actual usage pattern. Windows runs on well over 1 billion active devices worldwide. The taskbar search function is one of the most frequently used interface elements across the entire operating system, used by a significant majority of users multiple times per day for everything from launching applications to finding files to checking system settings. Even if any individual search query represents a tiny, seemingly insignificant piece of data, the aggregate volume of search behavior data flowing toward Microsoft's infrastructure, generated by this single feature alone, represents an enormous, continuous stream of behavioral information about what over 1 billion people are looking for, thinking about, and trying to find multiple times every single day. This is the broader pattern worth understanding about modern operating system design generally, not just this specific feature. Individually, small, seemingly harmless defaults, when implemented across an installed base of this size, generate genuinely massive amounts of behavioral data. No single search query tells Microsoft much of anything on its own. But the pattern of your searches over time, what you look for, when you look for it, how often you search for certain topics, builds a meaningful behavioral profile. And the existence of that profile depends entirely on the underlying default behavior we've been discussing, where local search activity doesn't stay purely local. Now let's move into what you can actually do about this, because just like the other issues we've covered in this series, understanding the mechanics matters most when it leads to genuine, actionable steps you can take on your own machine today. The first and most direct step is to navigate to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Search Permissions. Within this menu, look for the option related to Safe Search, and, more importantly, the toggle or setting that controls whether your search results include content from the web alongside your local results. Setting this to the most restrictive, local-only option immediately reduces the degree to which your taskbar searches are blended with Bing's web infrastructure. This single change addresses the core issue directly for the majority of consumer Windows 11 installations. The second step, particularly relevant for Windows 11 Pro users, is to access the local group policy editor by typing gpedit MSC into the Run dialog, then navigating to Computer Configuration, then Administrative Templates, then Windows Components, then File Explorer. Within this section, there's a policy specifically labeled along the lines of Turn off display of recent search entries in the File Explorer search box, and related policies under the Search section that allow more granular enforced control over search behavior than the Consumer Settings app exposes. This is a more technical step, but for pro users comfortable navigating this interface, it provides a more robust and harder to accidentally revert configuration than the standard toggle in Settings. The third step involves a registry modification for users who want the most thorough level of control, though this comes with an important caution. Registry edits should always be approached carefully, ideally after backing up the registry or creating a system restore point, since incorrect changes can cause system instability. Within the registry, under the path related to Windows search policies, a value can be set to disable web search integration at a deeper system level than the Settings app toggle alone provides. This is genuinely a more advanced step, and it's worth emphasizing that this is optional for users who want maximum assurance, not a required step for meaningfully improving your situation, since the settings-based toggle already provides substantial protection for the vast majority of users. The fourth step is more behavioral than technical, developing an awareness of which search tool you're actually using for which purpose. For finding local files specifically, using File Explorer's own search bar within a specific folder rather than the global taskbar search often provides a more purely local search experience with less web blending behavior, since you're explicitly searching within a defined local directory rather than invoking the system-wide search experience that's more deeply integrated with web results. The fifth step is reviewing your default search engine and browser settings more broadly, since the search to Bing pipeline is part of a larger ecosystem that includes Edge's deep integration with Bing as well. If reducing your overall data footprint with Microsoft's search and advertising ecosystem is a priority, considering an alternative default browser alongside your search settings. Adjustments creates a more comprehensive reduction in the data flowing toward this particular ecosystem, rather than addressing just one piece of a more interconnected system. The sixth step, for those who want to verify these changes are actually working, rather than simply trusting that a settings toggle does what it claims, involves using a network monitoring tool to observe your own outbound traffic during search activity. Tools like Wireshark, while requiring some technical familiarity to use effectively, allow you to directly observe whether outbound connections to Bing-related domains occur when you perform a local search after adjusting your settings. This step isn't necessary for most users, but for anyone who wants concrete personal verification, rather than relying purely on Microsoft's documentation about what a given setting actually does, it provides genuine direct evidence of your own system's behavior. Let's step back now and talk about the broader principle at stake here, because this goes beyond just one search bar and one company's specific implementation choices. The fundamental issue is about the difference between a tool that serves you and a tool that serves you while simultaneously serving someone else's interests without clearly telling you that's what's happening. A search function that exists purely to help you find your own files with no hidden secondary purpose is a tool that serves you completely. A search function that helps you find your own files while also feeding your query data into an advertising and search engine market share business, by default, without clear disclosure during setup, is a tool that serves two masters, and you, the user, were never given a clear upfront choice about whether you wanted to participate in that second purpose at all. This pattern repeats across so much of modern computing that it's worth naming directly, because once you see it in one place, you start recognizing it everywhere. Features get framed in their marketing and their settings menus around the benefit they provide to you. Enhanced search results, personalized suggestions, improved experience. But the same feature, examined from the perspective of the company providing it, often serves a second, less publicized function. Data collection, engagement metrics, advertising impressions, market share growth for a struggling product like Bing. Both things can be true simultaneously. The feature can genuinely help you find things faster in some cases, while also serving Microsoft's business interests in ways that were never clearly disclosed as part of the trade you were implicitly agreeing to when you started using the feature. The solution isn't to assume every feature is secretly malicious. That would be an overcorrection that leads to exhausting, unproductive paranoia about every piece of software you use. The solution is informed awareness paired with deliberate configuration. Know what your tools are actually doing. Know where the defaults point, and know that defaults are chosen deliberately by the companies that set them, almost always in the direction that benefits that company's business interests, rather than necessarily reflecting what would be best for you if you fully understood the choice being made on your behalf. And once you know that, you can make the adjustments that align your actual computer's behavior with your actual preferences and actual privacy needs, rather than passively accepting whatever configuration a company decided would generate the most value for their business when they shipped the product to you. Your local files are yours. A search box that helps you find them should work for you, and only you by default. Not for you while quietly generating advertising impressions and search engine market share data for a business division you never explicitly agreed to participate in. That the actual current default behavior of one of the most heavily used features in Windows 11 doesn't reflect that principle is something every user deserves to know clearly, in plain language, rather than discovering accidentally through a forum post or a privacy researcher's network traffic analysis months or years after they first started using their computer. Now you know exactly where this lives, exactly how it works, and exactly what you can do about it. The choice of how to configure your own machine is yours to make, but it should be an actual, informed choice made with full knowledge of what's actually happening when you type into that search box, rather than a default you never knew existed, quietly running in the background every single time you go looking for something on the computer you own.